we go. So the planning for today. We'll have a first part. We don't have that many minutes for us to discuss, but the first part will be dedicated to sharing a little knowledge we have dig into through different case studies. We'll talk about reverse innovation and we'll talk about traditional knowledge protection. And the second part of the meeting will be about what is going next, because today we are at the final event of this Africa-Europe Innovation Partnership. And we want to continue to work with you, to discuss with you, and to create this Europe-Africa network. So we will provide you with the ideas of other opportunities and also present you a new program called Enrich. And my colleague Zia will talk to you about Enrich later. So let's go for this session. Just before we start, why are we doing all this? Why are we talking? Why are we seeing each other today? Because this pilot project, which started 2.5 years ago, had the objective to gather people from Europe, from Africa, and people that are active in the technology transfer and innovation. The idea was first to map who were the people involved in innovation and technology transfer, both in Europe and in Africa. The second thing we wanted to do is to create a network of individuals, so create a large database of contacts that could be useful to develop the partnership. So what we've been doing for the last 2.5 years was to provide with training, provide with some discussions, provide with contacts sometimes. So today, this is not the beginning of a project. This is the end of a project. This is the beginning of cooperation, and I hope you will enjoy the session and tomorrow's session as well on IP and vaccine, but I'll come back to that later. So now I'm going to shut my microphone and give the floor to my colleagues that have worked on the concept of reverse innovation, having in mind that what is important for us is how to better and to develop a balanced and mutually rich partnership between Africa and Europe. So I give the floor immediately to Sophie and Adrian from DLR that will tell you everything about reverse innovation. And I put myself on.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and good morning to everyone. My name is Sophie van Knebel, and I'm working for DLR Project Management Agency in the area of European and international cooperation. And together with my colleague Adrian Steinert, we are going to present you a little bit the outcomes and resume of our study. Next slide, please, Elizabeth. And yeah, perfect. As Elizabeth mentioned, we, DLR Project Management Agency, had the responsibility to concentrate on the approach of reverse innovation in the frame of the Africa-Europe Innovation Partnership. And our objectives were to identify examples, best practices, and also experts with regard to the concept. We used mostly literature research, a lot of online research as well, but our core results came from our semi-structured interviews, which we conducted with 5 selected experts from science and practice. And to get a diverse perspective, we selected experts from different continents, mostly from African and European continent, but as well from Canada. Thank you. What is the meaning? What stands behind the concept of reverse innovation? So there are 3 major factors that are relevant. First, the innovation has to be developed for customers and markets of a country in the global south. That is the basic for this concept. Then afterwards, at a later stage, it has to be transferred to a market in the global north. And the third factor is that the region of the innovator or the company that innovates is not of relevance if it's a reverse innovation or not. The term originally comes from the area of product development, so it's mostly discussed in the literature of managerial discussions. And it was made popular by Vijay Govindarayan, a professor and chief innovation consultant for GE Healthcare. And the discussion about these kind of examples were ongoing already, but this term especially was made public in 2009. There are a lot of discussions going on in literature as well about reverse innovation, because somehow it follows the logic of the Western centric perspective on traditional innovation path, which refers to an innovation that is developed for markets of the global north and then afterwards transferred to markets of the global south in order to expand the product's life cycle. So reverse innovation somehow complements this idea, and there is the discussion if there's a possibility to have another term in order to not have the Western centrifugal perspective, and therefore sometimes it's also the term is used of global innovation. The idea behind it is that there were the observations that it's not enough to transfer innovations from the global north, that it doesn't respond to the needs and the demands of local markets of countries of the global south, and that it's not enough to only slightly modify, but there are like own market dynamics in countries of the global south that should be regarded, and therefore it's needed that innovation is tailor-made for these markets. And then afterwards, and that's the important step, then afterwards, companies, for example, see that it's also possible to make use of these innovations and transfer them to their headquarter countries, for example, if they're in the global north. One slide, please. We brought you an example. It's a really, new one, or it's out of our time of the pandemic now. It's a surveillance outbreak response management and analysis system, SORMAS software. SORMAS is an open source e-health tool for surveying infections and managing pandemic outbreaks worldwide. It was initially developed by a Nigerian-German consortium, mostly consisting of public health institutions, research institutions, and a global software company, which is basic for developing a software, and coordinated by the Helmholtz Center for Infection Research in Germany. The original aim was of the software was to prevent and control infectious diseases, and especially in structurally weak regions, and as well to early detect outbreaks. There were the financing came from different sources, but the main source was the Federal Ministry of Education and Research in Germany. It now concentrates on providing digital infrastructure for timely management and control measures to verify disease cases. And initially, it was started in 2014 during the Ebola pandemic outbreak, with the objective to give Nigeria the possibility to control and manage this outbreak. Then afterwards, it was implemented by Ghana. And there is the transfer. In 2020, European countries decided to also implement it and use it as a tool during the COVID-19 outbreak. So you have fulfilled all three characters that I was mentioning before. It was the target market was Nigeria. Then afterwards, it was transferred to a European country, for example, Switzerland, France, and Germany. And the third one, the consortium, was consisting of the innovators were Nigerian and German institutions. One slide, please. Yes. Here you can see the dashboard for the public health institutions. So you see that it's all the information that are collected that you can see here for their management. Next slide, please. And here we have an overview as well over the countries that are implementing this software. So the origin was Nigeria. Now it's deployed in France, Germany, Ghana, and Switzerland. But you see that there are more countries already interested as well as Burkina Faso, Fiji, Ivory Coast, and Nepal. So it's somehow it's an innovation that is of global interest. So coming to the results of our interviews, and there are some hypotheses, some observations we discussed with our interview partners, and we are really much interested in as well to get your feedback in case you have more remarks and recommendations maybe as well. What is important? What are the drivers of reverse innovation? So I think that's really basic, but it's really important for reverse innovation as well, that the importance lays on the idea and the mechanisms behind the technologies and innovation, not on the finished products, because normally it's not working. If you're taking a finished product and trying to transfer it to another market, normally it's not accepted because maybe the message of the product has to be different for a new market, or the cost structure is different and so on. So it does not work if you just take the product and transfer it. And that was the basic outcome where all the interview partners agreed. And then what really drives reverse innovation is that digital technologies somehow give the chance to make innovation more visible as well on other continents. So there's a possibility of countries of the global south as well to give their innovations more visibility, and therefore also attract investments and maybe attract transnational corporation companies, for example, that support the transfer to countries of the global north. What are challenges for reverse innovation, especially from African to European countries? Maybe just one observation, it was really difficult to find good examples, best practices for African or from African countries to European countries. There were in literature there were much more examples from Asian countries, for example, some from Latin America and so on. So we were focusing on that as well. What are the reasons? And a general reason is, or a general factor is the not invented here syndrome, which we notice a lot, and which was also a problem in the case of SORMAS. This syndrome refers, or it manifests that an unwillingness to adopt an idea or product because it originates from another culture. So that's really a cultural thing that enterprises or companies, but as well society, have to be open to accept innovations from other cultures. The second factor we heard was that Europe is concentrating on scientific or technological innovations, which is in some and most of African countries still in progress, and still needs time and a frame to reach a level where European countries are more interested or more looking to African countries to see what kind of innovation they can adapt as well. Then an important point is that societies have to have common problems to be solved through innovation. So the problem has to be similar in order to really see what kind of innovation could be of interest for the other country as well. And there, at least until now, the idea is that the challenges might be different between most of the European countries and African countries, but it might change as well with regard to climate change and so on. So I think there is a lot of potential in there. And then for African countries, the communication and publication of innovation is more difficult because, for example, there are less transnational companies that have their bases in the country and as well in countries of the global north. So the way to transfer the knowledge and the technology to the countries of the global north is maybe, or the infrastructure is not given so much. Okay, Elizabeth, next slide. And then what preliminary recommendations for policymakers and practitioners? An important point was the emphasis was that it's necessary to really create networking spaces for private sector actors from both continents. So one of the major recommendations, or the idea behind it, was that sometimes the exchange focuses too much on public actors, and however, these are not the ones that are creating innovation. So it's really necessary to give them the space to interact and have demand-driven innovation, because the private sector actors are really interested to work together. But at the same time, it's necessary to create a framework and an ecosystem, and an innovation-friendly ecosystem to promote the development of innovation in African countries, but as well in European countries. Then there was a strong message that it's to the public sector of African countries to say that the investment in research and innovation is really important in order to gain a sound scientific background knowledge, because somehow it's necessary to have this as a basis for creating innovation. And the last message was that due to, for example, the COVID-19 pandemic and to future austerity measures that might come up because of that, reverse innovation could be of particular importance as well for countries of the global north, because mostly in cost-intensive public sectors such as health or public transport and so on, to see what kind of innovations as well, resource-constrained innovations were developed in other countries that could be of interest in countries of the global north. That's so far from my side, and I'm happy to receive questions, comments, remarks, observations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophie. I see some people I know. I see Diana from Ghana. I see some other people from Tanzania, like Kenny. I don't know if all those concepts and these processes ring any bell, or did you came across any of those recently, lately? Or do you have any questions? Or it's crystal clear?
Maybe the comment in just in case you have some recommendations you would discuss directly, you can send me an email as well, and I'm happy to discuss it
Yes.
after the conference.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Thank you very much. Shall we then go to the next case, which is a little technical. It's about traditional knowledge protection. I know our friend John Kagwa supported for this case. And I will leave now the floor to Martin and Amber that work on that. Let's go for the technicalities, guys.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and welcome everybody. So my name is Maarten Koopmans, and I'm a consultant working at Technopolis Amsterdam office, and I've worked on this case study with my colleague Amber van der Graaf, who also will be presenting. So some context about this case study. The topic was identified at the first community of practice session back in Marseille, if I remember correctly. Well, these case studies are used to increase the knowledge and explore ways to facilitate knowledge and technology exchange between innovation actors. Traditional knowledge protection was identified as one of the important topics to study, because I think it was felt that the IP system, which was originally developed in the West, was not developed to serve the needs of local communities and indigenous peoples for certain type of knowledge, the intergenerational and communal knowledge that traditional knowledge represents. The relevance of this topic was also underlined by the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, They mentioned also that the concept, however, is not adequately understood, and that there are still many research gaps that are confronting policymakers to make effective, to implement effective protection. So we had a number of questions in this case study. First of all, we aimed to define the concept, which I think proved harder since there is not complete consensus yet. Then we also looked into different approaches of protecting traditional knowledge, to what kind of mechanisms there are currently implemented on a global, regional, and national level. And then we wanted to find out how effective these mechanisms are and what challenges are that are encountered by organizations aiming to provide this protection. So the approach to the case study, it was mostly based on desk research. There was quite a large body of literature available, mostly in development since the 1990s. Also, we had policy documents available from the existing mechanisms, but I think, yeah, the most important contribution that gave us a lot of context was through the expert interview with one of our community of practice members, Mr. John Kagwa, from the African Regional Intellectual Property Organization, AEIP6. So you can move to the next slide, Elizabeth. So, well, trying to define the concept of traditional knowledge, one of the most used definition is that of the WIPO. So I'm just going to read that out. It's knowledge, know-how, skills, and practices that are developed, sustained, and passed on from generation to generation within a community, often forming part of its cultural or spiritual identity. It's by the WIPO also defined as a broad subject matter that refers to the content of knowledge itself, as well as the expression of that knowledge. That's referred to as expressions of folklore. So this is kind of the definition that we went by, but also we understood that each organization that aims to protect traditional knowledge holds their own definition of this. The relevance of protecting traditional knowledge is quite broadly understood by international actors, both as a way of preserving the traditional and indigenous cultures and their knowledge and expression. For instance, protecting peoples against misuse or misappropriation of their knowledge. As an example, for instance, there are, you may be familiar with the Maasai people, who for part of their income rely on production and selling of traditional products. However, one of the challenges that they faced was that actors that are not Maasai people but had closer and better understanding of the commercial markets were imitating their products and then harming their own livelihoods, which again threatened their traditional culture. And another way that it could be relevant is for sharing benefits with traditional communities and indigenous cultures, indigenous peoples. For instance, if companies are interested in commercializing certain knowledge or certain practices or genetic material that is part of their agricultural system, then traditional knowledge protection could offer a way to share the benefits if well implemented. So next slide, please. I think Amber is going to highlight a bit the approaches. You're muted, Amber. I still cannot hear you.
Yeah, we don't hear you, Amber.
I was able to hear you earlier, so.
Can you, yeah, we really don't hear you. Can you go on, Martin? Ah, yes, Amber.
Sorry, how?
Yeah,
Yes,
good.
oh, very
Excellent.
good. Sorry about
Excellent.
that, everyone. So if we needed more hiccups. Okay, so as Marta indicated, traditional knowledge, it's a fairly broad concept. We're speaking about folklore, about traditional forms of expression, which can also take many forms, tangible and intangible, and also genetic resources, things like plants used for traditional uses within indigenous communities. These all fall under the broader umbrella of traditional knowledge. So protecting that kind of knowledge tends to fall into two main categories. At least this is what we see coming back in literature, academic as well as policy. In the first part, we speak of defensive traditional knowledge protection, which is really the, hang on. Sorry, I think we've flipped the definitions here. Well, in any case, defensive protection, that's supposed to protect communities and prevent people from using their knowledge and their outputs without their permission. Positive protection, in turn, that is supposed to actually empower communities so that indeed they have some influence over how their knowledge is used, can promote that type of knowledge, and also enjoy the benefits of its commercial exploitation. So examples of these types of protection can vary. You have databases wherein you can register different types of knowledge and outputs and expressions. Trade secrecy can also be used, where royalties are given for the use of a particular type of knowledge. And using disclosure requirements in other IPR systems so that a third party has to indicate where their particular knowledge came from. Now, some of those examples also apply within the category of positive traditional knowledge protection, and the reason being as well that these two often do overlap. So we speak of two types of protection, but in practice, the way that you would implement this, you can often speak about the same types of instruments. So here again, we have things like trade secret protection, but also registration of certain forms of traditional knowledge, geographical indications. So a certain genetic resource must be registered as coming from this particular area, and the applications of patent law, good old-fashioned patent law, wherein the use of a specific type of knowledge is attached to specific royalties or some kind of remuneration for the rights holder, shall we say. And very important to remember, they do go hand in hand in practice. Next slide, please, Elizabeth. So I'll quickly run through, in the interest of time, some of the key approaches that we saw coming back in the literature. So often, well, since about the last two and a half decades, indeed, international bodies have started to look and consider with national policy makers how to better protect this kind of knowledge. So often approaches mentioned include things like IP protection and intellectual property rights, wherein the creative or intellectual output of an individual is registered and protected. A common example is patent laws, as just mentioned. And again, the geographical indications and registrations are commonly used when it comes to traditional knowledge protection. Registration systems in this case are especially a bit challenging because how does one register, for instance, well, a non-verbal or verbal types of traditional knowledge, or practices and uses of genetic materials and resources that have been in use for decades, centuries by indigenous and traditional communities. So there are some challenges related to these more traditional approaches. The same applies to contract law, where essentially this revolves around an agreement made between a third party and a community who holds a particular form of traditional knowledge. And agreements are set up on how the knowledge is used, any kind of benefits that are generated and how they are shared. Challenges here being, how do you find the correct representative within a traditional or indigenous community? Often they can be very widespread. And how do you find the individual to set up such an agreement with? The other aspect as well is a skewed balance of power in these situations. Often large corporations come in and they tend to have a lot more thorough, better knowledge of legal systems than an indigenous community for obvious reasons, and more resources to also apply and implement these kinds of agreements. Other examples, ways of protecting traditional knowledge protection are customary law, not to be confused with international custom law. But customary law in this context refers to the laws which really enshrine the practices and traditions of indigenous and traditional communities in a country's national legislation. And sui generis models, another good example. This refers to legal models which take a very specific consideration of the topic they are trying to regulate. So in the context of traditional knowledge, we speak of IP systems which are tailored to the nature of traditional knowledge, namely the fact that it can take so many different forms. It tends to be diffuse amongst a traditional community, and it evolves, and it has been with us for quite some time usually, so not as novel as a lot of patents, for instance, need knowledge to be. So overall observations coming from the literature, I've put a few down here. There is this sort of inherent clash between the principles of Western legal approaches, namely safeguarding the knowledge of an individual, developing a sort of, well, a monopoly of sorts, if we're being honest, on how that knowledge is used. Whereas the principles and the nature of traditional knowledge tend to be a lot more collectively based, a lot more diffuse, older, and also for a lot of indigenous communities, they are supposed to serve the collective good. So safeguard and cordoning them off in legal regulation often goes against the principles of traditional knowledge. So lauded approaches in this context are indeed things like the customary law and sui generis models, because they take a lot more of a reflective approach to that which it is they are regulating. So traditional knowledge created by communities, indigenous communities and traditional communities, which don't perhaps follow the usual Western way of innovating and then dealing with that innovation. Sorry, next slide, please, Elisabeth. And Marta will walk you through some of the mechanisms and then explain a bit about each of these types of mechanisms, after which we'll give an in-depth look at two of them.
I'm sorry, I'm the timekeeper as well, and we need to run a little faster.
Of course, yes, Elizabeth.
Cool.
Thank you. Sorry.
So I'm going to run through this really quickly. So we've identified a number of global, regional, and national mechanisms. However, this is not an exhaustive list, but serve to give us ideas about which mechanisms to study more in depth. But just as a general context, there are a number of global mechanisms, agreements, for instance, on biological diversity and in the area of trade that take into account traditional knowledge protection to some degree. There is the establishment of the WIPO, Intergovernmental Committee on IP and Genetic Resources, Traditional Knowledge and Folklore, which is a very important platform that has been given the mandate to develop international legal instruments for the protection of traditional knowledge. However, I guess of their latest work plan, they're still working on this. So it takes a long time. But luckily, there are a number of regional mechanisms and national mechanisms that do offer protection in practice. So most important one that we found is on the African continent is the Swakopmund Protocol, developed by AEIP6, so our community of practice member, and their counterpart, OAPI, which is organization of French-speaking countries for IP protection. And then we have this number of national mechanisms that Amber will go into after. Next slide, please. So one of the, I think in our understanding, most furthest developed protection mechanism is the Swakopmund Protocol, which was signed in 2010 by 9 member states. And entered into force in 2015 when 6 states had ratified the protocol. It's a sui generis instrument, and the rationale was a growing interest in traditional knowledge and an observed misappropriation of and exploitation of this traditional knowledge. So what this protocol does is it affirms the principle that local and traditional knowledge is held by communities. And offer legal protection. So it defines the concepts again, which is it's very important, and includes provisions on the protection mechanisms. It aims to offer defensive and positive forms of protection, as was explained earlier by Amber. It is also important that this protection is automatic. So the countries that have signed offer automatic protection, and this protection is not subject to formalities. However, for it to work well, AEIPO and member states are working on setting up databases to serve as evidence and have a transparent overview of what this traditional knowledge is. The outcome so far is a thorough and important instrument that is still in development. For instance, in terms of implementation, in terms of enforcement, it is still facing several challenges. For instance, strong national competent authorities are needed to implement the protocol. There must be an increase in awareness also of traditional peoples that this system exists and that they can be used also in terms of positive protection where they reap these benefits of exploitation of their traditional knowledge. So that's very short Swakopmund Protocol. Amber, I think you can tell something about the national instruments.
Sorry, next slide, please, Elizabeth. Oh, there's the one. Thank you. So just quickly to give you one example, one example we looked at more in depth was the Zambian Act of 2016 for the protection of traditional knowledge, genetic resources, and expression of folklore. Now, this act aims broadly to do what the Swakopmund Protocol also does, namely to preserve traditional knowledge and traditional cultures, but also to try to instill a more fair way of spreading economic benefits generated from traditional knowledge use. So why Zambia? Why did Zambia do this? As far as we understand, there has been a longer tradition of IP regulation as it is within this country. So a bit more political, perhaps, support for the fact that national law should be developed and initiated. It was also developed to implement the Swakopmund Protocol, of which Zambia is a signatory, and indeed also is classified as a sui generis law by the WIPO. And to give you a brief description of what makes this indeed a more tailored or sui generis act, this act defines a series of concepts which are important to traditional knowledge protection, including the traditional context in which knowledge is created, communities, but what folklore, examples thereof, and what have you. A very interesting aspect here is the fact that traditional knowledge is automatically registered and protected under this act. So it does not need to be formally registered by an indigenous community, and in this way, considers, I think, a lot more the realities of indigenous communities and traditional communities and how they move, and the fact that, like perhaps most of us, they are not particularly well versed in the details of IP rights. I know I, until recently, was not. In any case, so permits are granted by the Zambian Patents and Companies Registration Agency, PACRA, and only with the express consent of the traditional community who holds the knowledge. Now, granted, enforcement provisions have also been included. Implementing them is still a bit of a challenge, but this is seen as quite an important and a good first step. Next slide, please, Elizabeth. So, overarching conclusions from the crash course that Martin and I have just provided you. The main themes we see coming back in our findings are the fact that the legal frameworks that are often used in the West for knowledge protection are somewhat at odds with the nature of traditional knowledge and how it is produced, and with the way that traditional communities live and move. So in that sense, tailored laws are thought to work better. Think of customary law as a just indicator, and the sui generis examples Martin and I just described. I'm so sorry, there's a large truck coming through my street. Challenges to traditional knowledge protection, even when you have a nice national legislation, is the fact that national borders still offer challenges. Plants do not really care about national borders and where they grow. Traditional communities can often move across national borders. So if you have a legislation which protects traditional knowledge in one country, but which also appears in another in which there is no such legislation, then the effectiveness of that first country's legislation is somewhat undermined, because a third party can simply go to that other country to make use of that traditional knowledge form. As indicated, monitoring and enforcing the legal provisions can also be a challenge. This is something which the WIPO and AEIPO are really trying to help establish and help national authorities with. And registering and maintaining databases of traditional knowledge, that too is something of a challenge. And here too, we see there is a fair amount of collaboration and knowledge exchange on how to improve that. Thank you. Next slide, please, Elizabeth.
Yeah, so we have a set of broad recommendations that relate to our conclusions. First of all, to create more awareness among, well, we're focusing here on African countries, but could also apply to Europe, on the value and benefit of traditional knowledge protection. As Amber said, it's important to ensure that traditional knowledge is protected even when it crosses over the borders. More support for regional organizations such as AEIP6 that we mentioned, which developed the Swakopmund Protocol for setting up regional bases to register this traditional knowledge, provide evidence, to harmonize existing and future frameworks across borders and across different levels of instruments, such as the global, regional, and national level. And then as for the EU, we yeah, what could their role be? I think that was one of the questions that we were asked for this case study also. That could be to support AEIP6 and other regional organizations in developing their instruments, but also including origin rules in their own patent frameworks, so, which would force companies to register where they have their knowledge or their traditional knowledge from. So that's our recommendations, and well, we're curious if there are any reflections or questions on that. So thank you.
Thank you very much to you both for this technical topic. You'll have all the results in a drafted report that will be made available very quickly. I'm afraid we are running out of time, and I would really like to. I really like my colleague Zia to present you what is Enrich, which is the next step for this pilot project. So. So I would really like to move forward a bit to talk to you about what is next, what is after AEIP. First of all, what have we been doing and where do we stand now? So as of June 2021, we have now a database of 288 named contacts of people, mostly in Africa, but also in Europe, interested in innovation and technology transfer. Those people that have been taking part in different events or trainings, etc. This is gold for future collaboration. And the idea now is what to do with you, what to do with us, with them. What we will do in the forthcoming days is to send you a message to ask if you would like to join different partner network. Those partner network are, for instance, the SAIRA open platform from Retro. It's an open innovation platform which put people together for innovation projects. We would like also to invite you to join the ASTP network, the Tech Transfer Offices for European TTOs. We would like also to invite you to join the SARIMA network, which is also an innovation network of innovation actors in TTO based in South Africa. You absolutely know them. So yeah, we don't want to do nothing with all these good will and willingness to share. So we'll ask you for transferring your contact details to those network. You will accept or not. I would like also to mention the Horizon Europe Horizon calls. So just a quick recall, but you already know that the new budget is now ready for funding the research at the European Union level. Part of this budget for the year 2021 and 2022 is like 350 million euros will be dedicated to collaborative research for Europe and Africa. Here you have some topics that will be dig into. So please check the EU funding and tender portal to see what are the opportunities, maybe to reach some consortium, because there are money there for collaborative activity between Africa and Europe. You will be also able to ask any question you want through the AEIP. And now I really want to give the floor to Xia to is going to explain to you what is the next step of the pilot project AEIP, which is Enrich. It's going to be much more practical, and I leave the floor to you, Xia. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And I see also I will need to expedite a little bit my slides, but also thanks for the speakers for the very interesting case studies. I think also here we can find many synergies in how the innovation partnerships in the future can then also be built on. So also from my side, good morning, everybody. My name is Xiaowei Luo. I'm project manager at Steinbeist UI, which is a German-based innovation consultancy. And we are the coordinating organization of the Enrich in Africa project. And I'm a member of this of the team. Here I'm also glad to give you a teaser. So basically, this is a teaser for tomorrow's main presentation from our main coordinator, Sandrine Doretto. But I will give you an overview, first of all, on the objectives, our project portfolio offering, our target groups, and the networks that we will create to support existing and new partnerships in close cooperation with AEIP. So on what is Enrich in Africa? So this is basically, first of all, this is an EU-funded Horizon 2020 project governed directly by the European Commission's Research Executive Agency. And we kicked off our initiatives the beginning of this year, and we will run for 3 years. As you see on this map, our distinguishing factor is that our project is a member of the Enrich Global Networks, which I would say are project initiatives initiated by the European Commission to support international innovation partnerships in key innovation hotspots. So basically in China, in Brazil, and in the US, we have already sister projects. And of course, we are closely cooperating here with AEIP, and we will build on the very good and rich outcomes from the AEIP initiative in supporting connecting innovation tech hubs and in building mutually beneficial partnerships here. Next slide, please. So on our objectives, first and foremost, we focus on capacity upgrading and connecting incubators and accelerators in Africa and in Europe as our main target group. Our objective here is to foster mutually beneficial innovation and knowledge exchange and to build also sustainable partnerships to provide co-creation opportunities for startups. So this is also our second objective. We strive to reduce barriers to facilitate internationalization to African and European innovators as our second main target group. And here we aim to facilitate their market exploration in both directions, both from Africa to Europe, as well as from Europe to Africa. And to empower entrepreneurship opportunities, to support them in their business growth by leveraging our platforms, our networks, and our programs. Thirdly, we aim to achieve both of these objectives through the setup of a dedicated Enrich in Africa Center, which will be based in and staffed in Africa. And here we are already in discussions on where to locate it, and this will be announced tomorrow. This center will coordinate a membership-based network of incubators and accelerators. It will facilitate the service provision from our end, and it will create also synergies with existing initiatives, which will also be presented, quite a number of them, tomorrow in the exhibition booth. Lastly, the fourth objective is that we strive to pilot a sustainable business model. This is a core concept of the Enrich centers. And here, among others, we will pilot a set of innovation support services to tech hubs, to innovators, and also to other innovation stakeholders. For example, also we try to see also synergies with technology transfer offices, with research side. So everything is in the making at the moment. Next slide, please. Now here we see, this is plenty of information in one slide, but this is basically in a nutshell what the value proposition of our project is. So Enrich in Africa provides a portfolio of innovation support services to both our main target group, the incubators and accelerators, as well as to innovators. If you check here on the upper left side here, we have basically the side for the incubators and accelerators, which focuses on capacity upgrading and networking through networking activities, through our membership network, through training activities and mentoring programs. And here, the beneficiaries of these support activities will be the members of our upcoming Enrich in Africa Champions Network, which is our membership-based support network, and tech hubs can apply and join to benefit from these pre-funded activities. On the upper right side, you see the site for the innovators, startups, and SMEs. Here, we will focus on business creation, acceleration, and market entry. So here we have activities such as soft landing in Europe or in Africa, incubation programs, open innovation challenges, and acceleration programs. If you see here on this side, we have also a very new feature, the Enrich in Africa community, which also connects innovators with each other, innovators with also business facilitators such as you, like as technology transfer offices, and with investors to basically facilitate fundraising, to also connect and identify the highest or the high potentials on both continents. And this is basically the Enrich in Africa community. And the centerpiece of our value proposition is that all the elements that we will provide, the innovation support services, the membership network for the tech hubs, and the virtual community for innovators and all the innovation stakeholders will be clustered in a digital platform. And as of now, this is still in development, but this will be released at the later end of this year. And this is the main value, to have an entry point for the complete European and African innovation landscape. Next slide, please. So as you see here, this is basically our current network, Champions Network of tech hubs, of incubators, accelerators across Africa and Europe. And here you see basically we have 10 tech hubs each for the current pilot phase. But also here we are currently also looking to expand the network in the second and third year of the project. Next slide, please. Yeah, so basically also here you see our project consortium. We are 12 consortium partners across Europe and Africa. I think I don't have time to go through every partner, but as you see on the European side, we have many also strong partners in incubation, in acceleration, in innovation support. And in Africa, the same, we have very strong tech hubs that are actually also on the ground providing services and programs. And this is basically a very strong consortium for the next 2.5 years. Next slide. Okay, perfect. So basically this that's it from my side. I hope I could give you a very compact teaser for our project. Also, I'm sure that you will have questions, but I'm aware of the time, and we are already a little bit over the break even. But here I'd like also to invite you to join our exhibition booth tomorrow. Here we have our open networking session already in the morning. So basically our whole coordination team will be there to answer your questions. I personally will also be available for one-to-one meetings, and our team too, in the afternoon tomorrow. And here you can connect with us on our project website, in our digital community on your equity, and also here through social media. And I believe you could also utilize our survey for TTOs and innovation facilitators if you want to get more involved with our network. So at this side, I think I can hand over back to Elizabeth. I'm sorry if I overrun a little bit with the time, but thanks for your attention.
No, thank you so much. I think this is really important to mention that we are not, we are not ending anything. We are just starting something, which is difficult. We struggle with that. For myself, I'd like to thank you very much. And in particular, I see Diana and John. We've met like 2 years ago in Marseille. It's so frustrating not to have been able to see you face to face for the last 2 years. But I really think, I really trust we'll manage to meet very quickly. We stay involved in this European-Africa partnership. Now, if you want to have some insight about Head Tech Challenge, Food Waste Thematic Challenge, and Clean Tech Thematic Challenge, I leave you to to the main platform. You can join that. I really encourage you tomorrow for this large conference on IP and vaccine, co-organized by Waitrose and the Research Fairness Initiative. It's going to be really, really interesting, very large. I hope to see you there. All the material will be available through the website. Again, thank you very much. Talk to you soon. Take care, and thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you
Bye,
very much,
guys.
Elizabeth.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye to everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much.